All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going through the textbook AppInventor2, Create Your Own Android Apps by Wolber, Abelson, Spertus, and Looney. I'm in the middle of Chapter 3, which is where we're building our MoleMash setup. I have started up the emulator, and we're going to see if when it starts, if we indeed do have the mole appearing in various indeterminate type of positions on the screen. All right. This is the code that we put in for our first one. This is the move mole, which tells it to move a random position on the screen, both with our height and our width. And we're telling it when the screen is initialized, what we want to have happen is we want that routine to fire. You've heard me say this in other lectures that this can really take some time as far as getting the the emulator ready when you start the program. Sorry, it is not responding. Okay, I'm going to try it one more time, and unfortunately when that happens, typically the only way that I can fix that is to literally force it by doing a restart. All right? While we're waiting for that, I'm going to move on. Now, we want this to not only start moving when the screen starts, but as it says, making the mole move every second will require a clock component. We left the timer interval property for the clock set to its default value of 1000, which is 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So we want to click the clock drawer, drag out the timer, click the procedures drawer, and drag out another one of those move mole blocks. So let's do that while we're waiting here. Oops. All right, so I'm going to come in here. I'm getting a connection error, and that's usually the problem. So I'm going to come over here to my clock, which is down toward the bottom. Whoops, I want to clock timer. All right, procedures, and I want to call move mole, and that's telling it to call every second right there. All right, so we've done this. As the author mentions, kind of an important point here. If that seems too fast or too slow, you can change the timer interval property accordingly. And what you'll find when you do some work, especially when you're doing games and other types of things on screen, that what can happen is it can either look real jerky or it can just look real choppy. And if you don't know the difference, you will as we go on and we look at some other games. All right. As it says, as you might recall, you created the hits counts label and the misses counts label, which have their initial values of 0. What we want to do is we want to increment the correct one. We want to increment the hits so that every time we tap and we hit the mole, the hits counter goes up by 1. And every time we try to tap the mole and we miss, the misses counter goes up by 1. To do so, as the author mentions, we will use the canvas1.touched block, which indicates the canvas was touched. The X and Y coordinates, all right, and whether or not the sprite was tapped. So we want this right here, as is shown on page 53 in your book. All right, we want the canvas 1 touched. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm getting a little bit big here, so I'm going to right mouse click on this and choose collapse block, right mouse click collapse block, and right mouse click collapse block. And I'm going to actually move those over. You'll just determine your own comfort level as far as what you do and how you do it, etc. But again, what I want here is the canvas 1 touched. So let's grab our canvas, let's find the touched, and there it is. And you notice that when we did that, not only is there a touch, but there's a touch up and a touch down, etc. Always make sure you grab the right routine. So the touched, okay, we want to get the touched sprite. But we want to put that into an if-then block. So let me get rid of that. So we want to add an if-then block, which I believe is under our logic. Nope, it's under our control. There it is. So we're going to add that. And we want in there an if and an else. Now this should make sense to all of you, because what we're saying in here, come on. What we're saying in here is what we want to do is if we actually touched it, we want to increment the hits counter. Otherwise, we want to increment the misses counter. Okay? So, set hit counts label text. And, whoops. What was the... Now we can put in our get touch sprite right here. All right, so we want to set our hit count label to whatever it was plus 1. So this is a set and this one's a get. All right, the get isn't shown with the word get on it, but that's okay. There it is, hit count.text. We're going to put a plus 1 in there, but let's move these even a little more over. Don't throw them in the garbage because we need them. All right. So this, actually, I'm going to move that down because we need a math operation in here that says we need a plus. So here we want to put in a 1. We can go over to math, and we can choose 0 and change that to 1, or we can just click here, type in the number 1, and when it comes up, oops, try that again. 1. Let's just do the math. And we'll put that in. We want to change that to a 1. Now we should, I don't know what I've got there, but I don't want that. Okay, we should be able to do some copying here, duplicate. And this should be the misses count label. And we want to set that to here, the misses count label, also plus 1. Move this down a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit. All right, so let's look and see if indeed what we have right here is what they show in the book. As far as I can tell, it does. Now notice, because the author does a very good job in here of explaining after you do this exactly what's going on. When the canvas is tapped, check to see whether or not the sprite was tapped. There's only one sprite in here, so we don't have to worry about multiple sprites. Then they show how you can actually create the block, and this is what I just showed you. All right. And they mention here, you can test this new code on your device by tapping the canvas both on and off the mole and watching the score change. Well, that's what we're going to want to do in just a minute. Now, I am producing, right there, you can see it's at 75%, the lecture that I just finished doing. So it may pop up in a couple minutes. If that happens, don't let that alarm you. It just means I'm just going to have to remove everything so we can save this second one. Now, they've got a very important term here. This is the bottom of page 54 in the book. And the author says, the ability to name and later call a set of instructions is known as procedural abstraction. Now, in English, what that means is the person playing the game does not have to need to know how the logic in here was implemented. And I think they mention it even here. It's much like when you're driving a car and you take the car and you put it from park, let's say, into reverse. Most people don't understand, at least under the hood, what's going on to make that happen. Most of us don't care. You just want to make sure that, for example, if you're in your garage and you put it in reverse, you go backward and not forward, type of an idea. All right? So the end user has to only understand what's referred to as the interface, and that's the GUI that we've created with the mole on it, with our buttons, with our labels, etc. They don't have to understand the implementation, which means how it was actually physically set up. They give you some advantages here of using procedural abstraction. It's easier to test code, especially if you're going to put it in more than one place in the program, because you can copy it around. If there's a mistake, you only fix it in one place. All right. And again, the idea, it's like if you write your own procedure. You can call it from multiple places, but it's the same procedure. So if there's a problem with it, you only have to change that in one place. All right, so it's easier to code, to test code that's neatly segregated from the rest of the program. If there's a mistake, you only fix it in one place. If you change the implementation, you don't need to modify the interface. Typically, as long as you keep the interface the same, you can collect procedures into a library to use in different programs, but unfortunately, as it says, that's not totally supported by AppInventor. You break the code into pieces. It's the old divide and conquer method. It's like you get home from work and you've got a boatload of rooms to clean in your house, and you kind of trick yourself. Well, I'll clean just the kitchen. Well, I'll clean just the kitchen and the family room. Well, I'll clean just the kitchen and the family room and the living room. Pretty soon you've got the whole house cleaned. All right, so I've finished this. So, as they say, there's a good chance you'd want to hit the reset button and have something happen, so all we have to do is set our text for both of our labels to 0. All right, so let's bring that out. That will be our reset button when we click it. All right, so again, we'll want to come in and set both of our labels. And it's the misses count label and the hits count label. So we'll want to set the hits count label. Text. We'll want to set that to 0. And I'm going to take this and duplicate it, because we not only want to set the hits, we want to set the... Oh, I thought it would let us. There we go. The misses count label. All right. So we've got both those done. Looks just like this. It says at this point you probably don't need step-by-step instructions for creating the button clicker handler, but here's a tip. Well, that's what I mentioned to you. Now I'm going to stop here. In fact, let's do the the vibrating. So when the mole is touched, we want to do a sound1.vibrate, and every 100 milliseconds, so it's every 1/10 of a second. I'm going to take the reset button and collapse that. And we want to again put in when the mole is touched. Remember, that was when the canvas was touched. This is when the mole is touched. So what do we want to do? We want to call our sound1.vibrate. And go to our sound component. All right. And we have to tell it how many milliseconds, and that's 100. All right. So the complete thing is shown here, and we've done all this. All right. Now the author mentions some variations, so there's things that you could do if you were so inclined. You could add buttons to let the mole move faster or slower to make it easier or harder to play the game. We could add a label to display the number of times the mole has appeared. We could add another image sprite with something else that you shouldn't hit. They give an example of a flower, and if you hit that, you get penalized. Rather than using a picture of a mole, you could put your own picture in there, for example. So in this chapter, as mentioned here, on the bottom of page 57 and the top of page 58, we went over the canvas component, which makes use of our XY coordinate system. We took advantage of the device's touchscreen through the canvas and image sprite components touched methods. We created real-time applications that react not just to user input, but to the timer. We used labels to display scores. We provided feedback to users through the sound.vibrate. Rather than using built-in methods, we wrote our own. And we saw how we can basically set up unpredictable behavior with the random integer block. Notice as it says, you'll learn more about techniques for games, including collision detection between sprite components in Chapter 5. In that chapter, we will build, it's called, I think, Ladybug Chase, where we've got a ladybug on the screen and there's a frog after it who wants to catch it and eat it. All right. I'm going to give this one last try, but to my knowledge, this is not going to come up. When I say this, I mean the emulator is not going to come up. But I'm going to try it one more time anyway. Get to my designer. And I'm going to do here, this is sometimes what you do is rather than just doing here an emulator, you do a connect and you tell it to reset the connection. Sometimes that clears it up. Not always, but sometimes that clears it up. I tend to wait 10 or 15 seconds and then do another connect emulator. Now, if this doesn't clean it up, I'm going to have to literally reboot the system. So if that's the case, I will have one more lecture tape in this particular chapter, but all it's going to do, hopefully, is just try to run the game. Again, I've had problems getting this to work. This appears to be one of those kind of games that works better and may only work, I'm not even sure, when you are using it on the phone. All right, but let's bring this, see if we can get this to come up and do something. If it comes up over here and it gives us an error, all right, then we're going to have to reboot. This actually looks like it might come up, and that's a good sign. Hopefully, there's our mole. See how he's moving around? I hit him. I hit him again. I missed. Oh, it is letting me play. I missed again. It's a little easier to play when you're using your mouse as opposed to trying it on the phone. All right, and this is actually moving so slow because I should be not getting as many points. So you know as well as I do, if I come back to the designer, to my block editor, and where I'm telling it here, it's not doing the vibrator, at least I'm not hearing it, all right? But if I come through here and I expand this block, all right, and remember this is telling it to move, yeah, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to expand the move. That's it, the clock timer. So right now, it's calling move mole, and move mole, that's actually the one that I want. Where's our move mole? Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I think it is in here, but I might be wrong. The point is, we should be able to come in here and change the time on here, okay? That's telling it to vibrate every 10th of a second. Somewhere in here we were doing something that was 100th of a, that was set to 100. I don't remember where it was though, unfortunately. It's not there. Wonder if we expand this number instead of 0, whoops, if we make it a bigger number. Let's try 40. I have no idea if this is going to work or what it's going to do, but we changed both those to 40. I'm trying to speed it up on the screen. And the way I look at it is if I'm able to hit it that many times, it's probably not a good thing. All right? So we finished this one now, built our first game. When we come back for our lecture in the next chapter, which will be Chapter 4, we are going to do a kind of an interesting app which is called No Texting While Driving. And when we do, we'll come in here and we'll take a look at some of the other stuff that's in here under social. All right, we'll look under texting. So I'll be back with that very shortly.